Everybody, welcome back. Welcome to TechShare Pro 2021, day 3, and for joining us in the keynotes at 11 o'clock London time. We've got another 90 minutes of fantastic conversations about accessibility. Day 3 focuses on accessibility leadership. We've got some sessions about making change happen at scale. BBC and Google talking about their experiences, people from BBC and Google talking about their experiences. We've got a conversation between somebody closer to the start of their accessible journey than the other person. So that's Heather and Ted having a chat about building the momentum inside an organization for accessibility leadership. And then we have a conversation, really interesting one, we're going to be publishing. I'm excited about this. AbilityNet's publishing a white paper based on some research we did about what IT professionals think about accessibility, the C-suite broadly, trying to tap into understanding who we're trying to connect with. And today's very much really about building that sort of network. We've have some sort of sessions in the past talking about the lone evangelist, the person in the organization who feels like they're the only one with a voice saying this is important, that accessibility's somewhere we want to go. Looking back over the past couple of days, you'll have seen lots of great sessions, bringing lots of different voices from business, from government, from charitable organizations, not-for-profits, the voices of disabled people themselves. This all comes together today. There's loads of stuff today where it's really hands-on on how we make that change happen in our organization. So I'm really looking forward to this, and I know a lot of people really got great contributions to make during the day. So before we start, a huge thank you. We're getting close to the end now. Huge thank you to our sponsors who've made this possible. Microsoft as our gold partner, we work with very closely in terms of content and planning. Barclays, Google, Intuit, Meta, Sony, for the support you've given us in terms of your input to content, as well as financial support, Attendable, Business Disability Forum, Code Mantra, DAT Europe, Digit Music, IAAP, IT Pro, RNIB, Text Help, UK Association for Accessible Formats, and the Valuable 500. Hopefully by now you've encountered some, if not all of those people in some way. A couple of them are going to pop up in this morning's sessions as well. But you can see we've built this event around the connections that we have in the community. And I think today's really the community day where we start to connect up and bring together this change that we want to make. So we're going to start with a conversation. We introduced a couple of people to each other. This is great. So Ellie works for the BBC, Jen works for Google. We connected them up. I was on a couple of calls with them where they were chatting about what we might cover today. Jen works specifically in accessibility and disability inclusion. Ellie's role is is head of design at the BBC. And so slightly different worlds, but just so much in common. And I think you're really going to enjoy this. So we're going to go straight over to that conversation with them now.
So I'm Ellie Runcie. I'm Chief Design Officer at the BBC. My responsibility is to head up the user experience and design team. So this is the team that shapes, creates, delivers the user experience across all of our audience-facing digital services in the UK and overseas. But also we are the team that think about the user experience from an internal point of view too for our employees. And the user experience matters just as much to our employees as it does for our audiences. So it's quite a broad remit. How about you, Jen?
That's great. My name is Jen Devins, and I lead the user experience team for our central accessibility organization. And we do also focus on helping teams across the company make sure that their products are accessible. We also create our own assistive technologies and different applications that are directly derived from user needs of people with disabilities, and also focus on the experience of people in Google that have disabilities, especially when it comes to thinking about the product experience, because we actually use a lot of the products we create, like Gmail. And so we kind of have to think of it from both ends. So I'm excited to chat with you today. And we've had lots of conversations leading up to this. And one of the best, I think, question to maybe start us off is just how you have gone about embedding inclusion and/or accessibility into your overall organization or corporation.
Yeah, well, I'll say first off that standing on the shoulders of giants, that's always the thing. I think all of this is it's a long game, isn't it? It's a journey that everyone is figuring out, and I think that the teams that have worked a lot along even just the last decade at the BBC have done an awful lot to put in place a lot of work to be so that it is partly embedded now across our audience-facing products, certainly. I mean, I will say that I think one of the big things that we've done in the last year that the team has achieved is making this part of our digital policy, and also making it part of our inclusion strategy in the organization, so that whether we're talking about our customers or whether we're talking about our employees, we're thinking about who are we designing for and how does this work for them? How well does this work or not for them? So I think, first of all, we know that we disable people when we create barriers, and our role, and certainly from an accessibility point of view, which we've really focused on for our audience-facing work, that our role is to help others to understand and build their capabilities to enable them to prevent and remove those barriers.
Mm-hmm.
So the digital accessibility policy for product is a major thing I think we've been able to do in the last 6 months. So first of all, having a policy in place at all is a really big thing that's owned from the very top of the business. You know, our exec board own it, they've contributed to it, they've signed it off. What that means is we've baked it right into our charter. You know, it's in our charter anyway that our mission is to serve all audiences. So the invitation and the responsibility is already there. Mm-hmm. And if we have it in our policy, it means then that has to translate into practice. So it's really helpful that we now have that as our policy. And I guess the current work that this team is actively engaging with is engaging the business in that policy, because so often, I guess, policies can be written and they can sit somewhere digitally on a digital shelf somewhere, and people don't really feel they understand them. So the first step is, how are we helping people to understand what the policy really means for them in the role that they play at the BBC? And so starting with our product teams, we're currently embarking on that exercise to help them understand what it means to them. Mm-hmm. And therefore it's a shared responsibility. So having that shared understanding is just the first step, really. And I think, you know, having a set of principles that bring the policy to life is something else that we're doing to just sort of really test out or really help, I suppose, people's accelerated understanding of what the policy is there to do. So for example, if our role is to serve all audiences, then how might we design an experience for the intended audience? We know that for some of the things, for things that we design, it won't be for everyone. It won't meet everybody's needs, let alone suit everyone's interests. So we need to make sure that if we're designing an experience, we're only excluding intentionally. Mm-hmm. And that's a very powerful thing to set out at the very start of a conversation once you understand the policy. So really engaging with the business on that policy, and then helping them really land that in the work that they do in the products that they're owning. Right. A set of principles that can be shared and owned is a really powerful first step for us.
Yeah, that's exciting. I know we've done similar things and really have latched onto our business mission, or just the overall company mission, to make information universally accessible, and just the commitments that have been put forward by our leaders, and really using that to help drive, like you said, the principles and stuff. And in addition to that, what we've been seeing the teams need, because we are also doing the same thing of, okay, now that we're saying this, how do we actually do this? And so really thinking about the specific tactical way that you approach this from each of the roles. So, and on our side, we've been thinking a lot about, as a designer or as a researcher, as a product manager, like what are your kind of roles and responsibility to ensure that you're considering the needs of people with disabilities throughout the process. And one of the areas, I think we've been pretty good about testing essentially for accessibility kind of once we have a product in place. But the thing that we're really trying to do is, I think this is a common theme I hear across the industry, is shift left, right? Shift our thinking more left. And so when we're just embarking on our initial research, even just foundational research to understand which product should we build or what are the user needs, ensuring that that research is inclusive of people with disabilities and beyond. Like, we really do try to consider all the different dimensions of diversity in that, because in our perspective, sometimes just that foundational research is it's such a relatively easy way to just have the conversations, and really understand the needs, and you can do that at scale. And that it also kind of helps, I think, set the stage for the team that's, creating the product. It's like they're already trying to think a little bit beyond maybe where they came to initially and thinking of different needs or different ways that people approach it. So we're really trying hard to focus on that, which is exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I explore that a little bit more with you then? Because it's with user research, there's always in many different organizations I've worked with it previously, there's always a really good active debate about when user research, when user needs come into the design process.
Right.
And there is a bit of, I would say this, of course, but it's right at the very beginning, like you said, shift left, almost in the problem framing, at the problem framing stage, rather than the validation of sort of an idea that we think will work, and then applying accessibility to it.
Right.
So I think, like you said, I'd love to know more as well about how you've embedded accessibility into that user needs, user research activity, and almost therefore as a lever for innovation, because if we can bring it shift left, that's also opportunities to unlock new value, isn't it? Can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. So, one thing that my team specifically is focused on, because we also create products directly for people with disabilities, is doing a lot of foundational research that's really focused on different types of disabilities. And through that research, the learnings and insights and just understanding the user needs are intended to help inform our products, but also kind of shared across the company as, here are some insights that you can understand and learn from and start with to inform maybe design sprints or just, any sort of ideation phase. And then beyond my team specifically, we're always encouraging teams to just, again, any sort of research you're doing, just make, include some people with disabilities or one, or, just to try to get that going and kind of build that muscle. And to do that, though, it's very evident that we needed to build that infrastructure as well. And so that's another thing that's kind of a whole other area of our team, is to create the research infrastructure for other people to do that. So we've created different like accessibility panels of trusted testers that our researchers can reach out to. So there's a lot that goes into that. And especially as a company of a large scale, there's a lot we need to do. We can't just ask teams to go out and do this. There's also training, because there are definitely things to take into consideration when you are conducting research with people with disabilities. But all that said, we have definitely seen some great progress there, and just those I guess nuggets of innovation. I will also just note, we as our overall org and across Google, we do have an internal accessibility week, and we do host something called an innovation sprint, where same kind of thing. We try to bring teams together that might already have an idea they've been incubating and just hadn't had time to focus on, or just some new needs we may surface, and just get people engaged in that. But yeah, having the research infrastructure, even do any of that, has been really critical for sure.
I bet that sounds amazing. And you talked to other forms of infrastructure and sharing insights that others can access, and to sort of translate at scale. We have, it would be great to hear what you do at Google. We have a global experience language, which is our design system. And again, one of the commitments that we have in the policy is that, everything that we designed will be based in that design system. The design system will have accessibility baked in, and it sort of really does. And also, as experiences become even more immersive and multimodal, that design system will adapt alongside those sorts of developments. So it's been incredibly powerful, because the global experience language as a design system is also a creative framework. It invites collaboration. It isn't just for the designers to use, although it's called a design system. You have different disciplines, including researchers, with the potential to access and use the assets, the patterns, the components, the guidelines that exist in this design system. So I think it's been incredibly important for the organization over the last decade to have GEL, the global experience language, for that very reason. And we're I think we're at a really exciting stage at the moment, where it's existed for a decade or so.
Mhm.
It's got the basic foundations, but we're about to sort of lift it again another level to sort of again push accessibility further and look at where, you know, consumers are changing their patterns, their habits and their behaviors, and thinking about how do we need to adapt our services to meet their needs in a way that also factors in accessibility at the heart of it. So GEL has been an incredibly important way for us to build, design scalable, coherent experiences with accessibility at the heart. I think that and the policy have together sort of enabled that translation into practice. I think they're both very powerful levers. I mean, tell me about how you do that. You know, how, you know, I'm sure you have something very similar. Is accessibility something that's at the heart of that too?
Yes. Yeah. Well, first of all, I've always really admired GEL, and just down to the details of, you know, the components, having the accessibility call outs and information, and having that externalized, I think is really, really powerful. And yeah, we definitely, again, I think when we think about just how to scale this, the infrastructure thing, like you pointed out, is really key. It's kind of, how do teams currently work? What are their needs, and where can we bake accessibility in as much as possible, so it's as easy as possible for teams? And so the design system, and our major one is material design, has been our route for doing that as well. And so looking hard at each of the components and providing more guidance on how to ensure that these are accessible. And also using that platform. So externally on the material, the current material site, we actually have a new version that's been launched called Material U. But on Material 2, we do have a really robust area of our accessibility design guidelines to share with the world, understanding, you know, other third-party teams or products are using material design as well. So we're trying to use that as a forum and stage to also kind of push forward the needs, and just even the kind of the tactical how-tos of how to do this. But yes, the design system has been really critical to at least getting people off on the right foot, right?
Yeah. And so much of this is down to people and enabling our people to understand this and to be excited about this. This is an opportunity for exciting new ideas and innovation, like we've touched on. And we've talked before about the importance of culture, really, and how can this be a powerful opportunity for us all to be more curious and to sort of approach it with that mindset, as opposed to maybe thinking we must think about accessibility as well. You know, it should be so integral and natural that when we're designing experiences, we should be really curious about what does that mean for all of us with living with different experiences. What would that mean? That could be an exciting opportunity for innovation. Are there things that you've done that have, you know, you've tried stuff out culturally in the organization that have worked well?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think so much of it, like you were saying about the curiosity, is a lot of it is like how it's positioned, you know, and how we talk about it. And I think that differs for every organization. You know, it has to resonate with what your organization is all about. And the curiosity has been very helpful for us, in addition to kind of the more standard drives of it's the right thing to do, it's in our mission. But one thing that has definitely we see is, like, as much as we talk about it and we have the commitments from leadership, there has to be the right incentive structure as well for teams to focus on this and to truly make it part of their actual process and their kind of their daily process. And so that's an area we're always continuing to explore, is just thinking about at the individual level, at the performance expectations level, like what are the ways that we can ensure that this type of work is recognized and given credit and expected of our not users, but our employees. And so we're always investigating areas in that. in that space, and other types of incentives too, just kind of like just broader general recognition and rewarding of this type of work. If we want to see more of it, we need to show people like this is valued. So I think that that's been kind of a really just like a crucial thing for us to continue to drive on, because again, it's a massive company, and it's been around for a while now. So just trying to shift that has been is still a work in progress, but we're excited about the progress we're making. And how about you guys?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same for us really, although I guess it's one of the things that we've done over the years is build a community of interest, a community of practice.
Yeah.
And inextricably linked, it's called the Champions Network, and they're a very powerful community. There's about 200 of them across the digital experience, and their role is really helping to drive that shared understanding, shared language. That they grew. It was really interesting how it started, because where they are now is not how it all began, but really they are, you know, very passionate individuals who are almost they're helping to protect that knowledge by sharing it across so many people. So they're not, you know, we try and make sure that the champions are the people that aren't the people that are going to fix the problem, but they're there to champion the need, champion the point that we should be, have we addressed this concern? Have we thought about this in this way? You know, and actually to trigger those curious conversations rather than sort of coming in by stealth to fix something after we've realized it doesn't work. I think, you know, it's all of our responsibility, but they play a particularly powerful role to make sure that we're thinking about it in the day-to-day, and that we're sparking those curiosity-based collaborative conversations. And I was talking to the accessibility team in a few days ago in the run-up to our conversation, and Jamie Knight, who's in our team, he said, I can't remember the last time I had to argue why about accessibility, which is nice. You know, he said, you know, most of the chats he now has is about collaboration and how, you know, defining how things could work and then looking at what's the pathway to get there, which is a real shift. I think he feels that that's particularly a shift the team feel in the last sort of couple of years that they've really made. So, and that Champions Network has been so pivotal to that. And I think it's really powerful because, again, it just goes back to it's all of our responsibility, having that community of interest and practice across our very large organizations is a really important way, or one of the important ways, again, to make sure we're embedding it at scale. Yeah,
that couldn't be more true, of needing some sort of programmer network to kind of build and share the learnings and the information, but also, I really like how you said that they truly are the champions. Like, they aren't being skilled up to do the work necessarily, right? It's to be there and start those conversations. We do have a similar program, the Accessibility Champs, actually, as well, with some similar goals as well, and have seen kind of tremendous growth. And what's really exciting is just seeing we have different events throughout the year that are internal. And actually this week we have a pretty robust UX University summit, essentially. And it's there's a lot of classes that are taught by Googlers to Googlers. That's what we call ourselves. And just to see over the years the number of courses, or just, you know, they could be reflection or whatever sort of presentations that have been focused on accessibility and inclusion now. Like, it keeps growing. And so just to see, and it's not, you know, our team, it's across the company. So just seeing that people are, I guess, carrying that message forward has been really exciting, because those conversations are happening more. And I'm excited to hear too that you guys also are seeing the conversations a little bit less about why do we need to do this. It's more like, okay, now how do we do this? I
think obviously our teams already do this together, but you know, also opening it up. I love the UX University idea. I know the team are always as well interested in how other organizations are building their champions network. So that's something we can explore again line, and just in terms of training as well, the sort of training you do, because it's again very important to us too. But you know, just in terms of for public good, you know, I think it's such a great fertile ground for us to be as organizations sharing how we're doing what we're doing, so that we're sharing best practice, good practice, or things that haven't worked,
Yes.
so as much as we can with industry at large. Certainly from a design industry point of view, I think that's so important that we learn from things that don't work as much as from things that really work,
Right.
so that we can help everyone to make and accelerate greater progress.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
I'm pleased, Jen, that we're at our time, aren't we? We're at our
I think
allotted time.
so. Yeah.
Really enjoyed listening to the things that you're doing, and so I know this is only the beginning of our conversation as well, but hopefully it's been helpful for you too, and we've conversation to be continued.
Yes, yeah, extremely. It's so, like you said, valuable to understand what other companies are doing and just how they're approaching it. And yeah, I think the challenge is a whole other discussion that would be good to continue on, because there definitely are a lot.
That was great, isn't it? There's this thing about accessibility for for any of us that've been doing it. Big organizations like BBC and Google, sometimes you can look in and you can wonder, who's inside it and what they're doing. And just hearing from two people, they didn't know each other before, and just seeing all that common ground and recognizing that passion and that commitment to change that's coming through from them, I think it's just really gives you that sense of energy and moving forwards. And of course, a couple of key themes came up in that. One of them in particular around champions networks and the growth of champions networks, and certainly the BBC is one that we all look to in terms of development, and lots of examples of the way they're developing it, and equally the UX element that the Jen in particular sort of highlighted, and then crosses over directly with Ellie's role. That's part of the gang that we're connecting in with, and that we're part of, sort of natural connections to make there, and the training and support that people are looking for there, and working together with colleagues across that divide is relatively straightforward. I think accessibility and UX is an obvious connection. But the Champions Network, I'm going to come back to that one. The next conversation's really great between Heather Hepburn from Skyscanner, Ted Drake from Intuit, amongst other things, Champions Networks. But I'm going to hand over to them, and this is a great session about what the lone evangelist, as Heather was a couple of years ago. First met her at TechShare Pro 2019, the changes that are going on inside her organization, and Ted's experience in terms of long-term experience in terms of accessibility and the evangelizing and growing the network of people who are on your side, and the allies, and building the relationships. This is so lovely to see the connections there, and also just to start learning about how we can all build these together.
Hi everyone, my name's Heather Hepburn. I'm from Skyscanner. I'm the accessibility lead there, and I am thrilled to be here today with the legend that is Ted Drake. Quick visual description of myself. I have blonde, slightly wavy hair. I've got black glasses on. I'm sitting in my office in sunny Glasgow. And yeah, Ted and I have got 20 minutes or so worth of chat to go through. Just very briefly before I hand on to him, I have been with Skyscanner for 3 years. I started there as a UX writer, and then quickly realized that the company were not really focusing on accessibility in the way that they should. So kind of carved out a role for myself. So I would say I've been doing the accessibility role for 2 years. Ted has been doing it for 20 years, hence the status. So Ted, I'll hand over to you for an introduction.
Sure. My name is Ted Drake. I'm the Global Accessibility Leader for Intuit. Intuit makes financial software like tax software, accounting software for small businesses and people. I got into, personal description. I'm an older white man wearing a black shirt with a blue background, gray beard, glasses. I got into accessibility because I have a degree in fine art, and I worked for the Museum of Fine Arts in San Diego. And on the side, I had been building websites. And so when they needed a website manager, I raised my hand and said, I can do this for you. But I didn't know anything about accessibility. And I quickly realized that when you're a museum and you're getting money from the government, you have an obligation to make your content available to everybody. And so that's how I learned about accessibility. From there, in the process of rebuilding the website, we discovered standards-based web development. This was around 2001. And so I began working in standards-based web development, which is essentially build it right from the very beginning. And so accessibility for me was always about just doing things the correct way. I moved over to Yahoo and was a web developer at Yahoo, and I co-founded the Accessibility Stakeholders Group, and which eventually became the Yahoo Accessibility Lab. And one of the interesting things is that when I was doing accessibility before Yahoo, it was always like a checklist. It was always, this is something I have to do. But when I joined Yahoo, that's when I started actually watching people with disabilities actually use our products. And that's when, it doesn't really have the same impact if it's just you're doing it because that's the way you're supposed to do it, as opposed to actually watching how people use your product in different ways and how it impacts their lives. From Yahoo, I moved to Intuit. I've been at Intuit for about 10 years. And one of the things I love about Intuit is that I've never had to create a business use case. I've never had to prove that if I fix this thing, it's going to bring us $1 million. At Intuit, we care about the customer. So what I typically do is I will show them, if I need to make a serious change to a product, I show them how it's broken. I show them a video. I show them customers. And I give them customer feedback. And so when people see that how their products are not working the way they expect it to work, that's what I need to show. And that's how we make changes into it. So it's been a great time at Intuit, and I'm looking forward to more years in the future.
I agree with it. It's so much easier when the company is customer first. Skyscanner, we talk about being traveler first all the time. It's such an important value to us, and it does make those conversations so much easier. I have so many questions I'd love to ask you, Ted.
I have a few questions for you. Heather and I have been talking. I'm sorry to cut you off, but Heather and I have been talking, and it's like we both are learning so much from each other.
The 2 years versus the 20 years, it's quite different places, isn't it? I guess the first thing I'd like to chat about is like kind of like the challenges that I'm facing at the moment. So we've been doing accessibility now for the 2 years. And I would say that for that period of time, I feel that we're in a good place. So we've done a lot of training throughout the business. Accessibility is mentioned in our strategy, our engineering principles, our web and app production standards. And Skyscanner, we're a global travel brand. Our products are everything to us, our website, our app, and our mobile website. So it's vital that they are accessible. We have an accessibility guild with champions, informal, mind you. I could ask you a billion questions about that. And we're part of the Valuable 500. So we have made that public commitment to improving disability inclusion, which was a huge step for a company who's quite young at this. So I would say all of that's going pretty well. But when it comes to actually embedding accessibility best practices across our product development process, so I'm talking about research, design, copy and content, and then development and testing, that's where I'm finding it slightly harder. So everyone is behind it, everyone's on board. It's just actually making it happen. So I'd love to hear from you some words of wisdom about how you've approached that in the past, and if you have any tips.
Yeah, and I think a big issue is there's a cliche of not boiling the ocean. You can't just try to solve everything at once. So part of the point is you are the leader, and it's your job to prioritize and to create a game plan. Now, I was looking, and Skyscanner has a really nice open source component system. And it has excellent accessibility built into it with the protocols and such. So that's a great start, because when you're using components, when you're able to build accessibility into the core, into the central, then that means that it's now a matter for your developers and your designers to work with those components. It relieves a lot of the effort because they don't have to think about things like keyboard accessibility because it's built in. So part of it is to go through your products and say, okay, we have X amount of errors in the page. We need to get that down to 0. So how do we do that? We did this with TurboTax. We had a really, really wonderful team of developers that were building the component system. And they implemented automated testing. And there were, I don't know, I'm just going to throw a number out there. Let's say there was 15,000 errors. So it's really difficult for them to track when someone adds something to the library and it includes an error.
Mhm.
So they were looking at that saying, well, I know I have 15,000 errors today. And when you did this push, now we have 15,010 errors. So I guess you had just added 10 errors. Well, you know, that just doesn't work. So what they did is they looked at their test results and they started saying, okay, well, if we fix this, then we're going to reduce the error count by 1,000. If we fix this, then we're going to reduce it by 1,000. And so systematically, over the course of 2 months, they were able to get their error count down from 15,000. And that's just a number I pulled out of my head. They got the error count from 15,000 down to 60.
Mm-hmm.
And that was because
That's
they
amazing.
looked at the easy stuff, the obvious stuff, things like duplicate IDs, images missing alt text, you know, form labels incorrect. And then when they were down at that last 60, that's when they really had to focus. Let's make sure that all of those components, let's rebuild them, let's fix them. So they got down to 0 errors. Once they're at 0 errors, then they're able to automatically find out, okay, this is a problem. We can fix this immediately. They shifted from a repair mode to an accessibility first mode. And I believe Tyler Krupika, he's now, he left Intuit. I can't remember off the top of my head where he's working, but he wrote an article about how they designed the new calendar widget. And they didn't start with design and engineering. They started with reaching out to customers that use screen readers. So they reached out to about 4 different customers that use screen readers, and they talked to them. How do you use a calendar widget?
Mm-hmm.
One of the trickiest things to do. We were all about dates and calendars as well. It's an area of problem.
And one of the persons said, I didn't even know you had a calendar widget because it's a text input. I just typed the date. So they kind of built the calendar widget around those customers that use a screen reader so that they had the core functionality set up. And once they had that working, then they were able to go back to the design team. The design team and the engineers were able to then layer on the styles and such.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that was kind of a long-winded answer, but it's basically, it's hard for people to comprehend the errors when there's a lot of them. For instance, I didn't want to go back into Skyscanner specifically, but you have a lot of errors that you're using an ARIA label on a div. And that ARIA label on the div is representing an image. And theoretically, you shouldn't put an ARIA label on a div. But if you used role equals image and you transform that div to an image, this is for a ratings widget. That's a very simple example of how you could say, look, if you just simply transform this div to an image, role equals image, we would remove 10,000 errors from our logs.
I guess if that is in the design system, then theoretically everybody should be using that component, and therefore you're not creating the errors over and over again. Yeah, it's great advice. The design system is where we have started, but we know we have a lot more work to do there. What about if that's a component library element of it? What about in the design space? Is there anything that you try and implement with your design teams that you've worked with?
One of the things I learned with design teams is that it's not about telling them that they can't do something. And this is where a lot of times in accessibility, we're always saying your colors are not enough contrast. That's such a common complaint, is that I can't see the colors because the colors don't have enough contrast. It's much better to say, you have the power to create these amazing keyboard interactions. All you need to do is think about the keyboard, and then let's pass those requirements over to the engineers. Think about this whole new group of people that have not gotten the design excellence that the mouse users have used. So it's not about telling designers that you can't use that gray on gray that they love, but it's more about telling the designers, think about how much more you could do. Because designers want to control the experience. They want to deliver a beautiful, delightful experience.
Just give them that extra challenge and they should rise to it.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant. Yeah, there's so many things we could delve into there. But moving on, a question about metrics. So when I first started, I know that I was always asked about metrics. What's the ROI on doing accessibility? And thankfully, I'm not asked that question anymore. We're kind of beyond that question. I don't know how to answer that question properly. And thankfully, there are a billion other reasons to be doing accessibility other than ROI. But I'm wondering from your experience, what metrics do you feel really important to capture and track over time? Which ones have been the kind of game changers for you? We're just starting to measure the accessibility score of the various pages on our products. And that's going to be the first time. We haven't actually started publishing that across the business yet, but when we do, it's going to give great visibility to the teams and to everyone else to see where our issues are, where we're doing quite well. And I'm hoping it's going to, ramp up people getting on board with stuff and actually making the fixes and staying with the best practices. So yeah, just interested to hear what metrics you feel have been worthwhile.
The key about metrics is start them as soon as you can. And also realize that some metrics that you started measuring, they need to be adapted, or they just need to be thrown away because they weren't relevant. So just remember that it's not precious. You can always start over and reconfigure your metrics.
Okay.
The first thing that we did was we looked at what are the 10 most important parts of accessibility at Intuit. And this was actually provided to us by DeQ, the consultant group. Because, for instance, at Intuit, we're not a gaming company. So some of the requirements for a game are not appropriate for us, but we focus on what was important for us. Each of those 10 elements get a 0 to 5 stars. And this is a manual evaluation. So 80% of the images have alt text. There's no background images. I think this is probably 4 out of 5 stars. So it's a judgment call. We take a measure of that, an average. And so what we end up with is a 0 to 5 score. And we date stamp it. So I know that on February, this product ended up with a score of 3.5. And then I know that if it's below 2, it's in danger. If it's between 2 and 4, it's, it has some issues, but it's probably under construction or it's being improved. And 4 to 5 means it's green. And so that has allowed us to create a dashboard for our execs. They can go right there and they can see, oh, okay, my product is green, I'm happy. Or my product is yellow, so we need to think about it. So your metrics also have to have a way of making it easy to see and easy to understand.
That sounds so useful to have. I'd love to know how you go about doing that. Does that take a team of people or is that an automated thing?
No, it's all manual. So it's just every time that we look at a product, then before we finish what we're doing, we go to that database and we just simply update it. And if you set it up, we use a database. It's really easy. It doesn't take that much extra time. It takes maybe, you spend an hour doing an audit. What's another 2 minutes to update a database?
True.
The key thing is the date, because some of our products are critical and they get updated regularly. Some of them are not so critical and they may go 2 years without a manual update.
And
the other thing,
sorry, carry on.
The other thing I was going to say is automated testing. We create a lot of spreadsheets to track our automated testing software because we want to be able to make our own metrics. And finally, the last one that's interesting for our accessibility champion programs is that when someone becomes a champion, we ask them for a few things: their name, their email address, their user ID, their manager, what product company they work for, and what product do they work on, basic stuff.
Yeah.
We asked them in the process of becoming a champion, did you find an issue when you ran an audit? and what was the bug you created. So that's also a way for us to know how many bugs were created during the process of becoming a champion. Now, what we were able to do is we had 1,000 people complete the championship program so far. I took that export of that database and I sent it to our HR team. And I asked them, could you compare these 1,000 people to the general public? Because we're at about almost 10% of Intuit has completed the champion program. Because I thought, can we prove that joining a champion program, just like joining an employee network, actually improves morale, improves commitment to the company? And can we see that this might actually result in higher promotions and fewer people leaving the company voluntarily? So that's one of the metrics that we've done some initial studies, and the results are good. They're significantly better, but
That's
it's
brilliant.
still too early to say.
I can imagine that would be the case. We just had our Accessibility Guild meetup this morning. We do it every 2 weeks. And, a couple of people were saying in that, it's their favorite meeting of the fortnight. It's just such a happy place. It's always so positive. And I can see how those metrics would all be in a better place. I'd love to, let me know when you find out more about it, because it's something that I need to start capturing as well. For mine. Okay, and finally, the last thing I think we've got time to chat about is around priorities. And this is, we could maybe chat about how we get people on board with this as well. So a particular challenge of mine, for an example, I could be working with a designer and a content writer, and we could have a beautifully accessible concept that gets then handed over to development. And a development team can quite easily at that stage say, yep, we hear you, but we're not building that in for the MVP. So for the very first go of this, we're not tackling accessibility. We'll do that down the track. And that, to me, that's a killer. So I guess it's a wide question, but there I need to help the development teams prioritize accessibility. How do we do that? How do we get product owners on board? I feel they're key to a lot of this. Product managers, they should be expecting accessible design coming in. They should be expecting accessible build coming out. And they hold this brilliant key role where they see everything. So how do we get them, the people who are managing all of this, and also the leadership, to prioritize accessibility, not over everything, of course, but to have a high on the list.
MVP, that's a loaded term, especially with accessibility. So one of the things I would recommend is you have a component library. So a lot of times if someone's creating an MVP, there's no extra work to make it accessible. So it's a matter of breaking down the stigma and the misconception of accessibility. If it doesn't take any extra work to configure a component correctly, then there's no reason why they can't make an MVP accessible from the very beginning. A lot of times they want to create an MVP and they want to throw everything out in the air and they want to see how grand it can be. And the concept of accessibility might say, well, you can't make it super grand, you can only make it semi-grand. But it doesn't take any extra work for them to make it super grand. Are they trying to create a calendar widget that you spin in a circle? They're probably not. They're probably taking the calendar widget that already exists, putting it into a page. What is so special about their MVP that has to be inaccessible? It's kind of flipping it. It's saying, instead of making all your MVPs accessible because it has to be, it's like, explain why it's not accessible. What is so special about your MVP that it can't be made accessible?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, why not?
It looks like we've got to start wrapping up. I know that there's a lot of conversations today.
Yes,
we didn't even talk about champions, but I know that there'll be a lot of conversations about champions later today.
Yes, we will talk about champions a lot more later in the day. Ted, thank you so much. It's been lovely chatting to you, and I'd love to catch up with you again to go through the other million questions that I have for myself.
Thank you so much, Heather. It's been delightful.
Lovely. Thanks, Ted.
That was great, isn't it? As they both mentioned, they're going to be both around during the day as well in our champion session today. I just want to pick up on a couple of things that were mentioned there. I think that conversation was largely about the people building stuff, the UX teams and so on. The component library popped up in there. We've actually run a session this week around accessible component library on Tuesday lunchtime, I think. The accessibility team, the AbilityNet team ran. And there's lots of practical stuff. I know lots of other Champions Networks and others are producing materials and resources looking at making the actual core components accessible as part of those building blocks. That's the destination, I think, in terms of trying to make change. But there was so much great stuff packed in there. The champion session later on will be building on that and opening up the conversations with lots of people who've got experience in that space. And I really hope you're able to join us for that. Switching tack slightly, what we're going to do now is Sarah's with me from AbilityNet, and we're going to be hearing about broadly what IT professionals, the digital executives, the C-suite think about accessibility. I think in terms of building allies for change, I think, Sarah, what we're looking at here is really trying to find out what do they think about accessibility, what's their take on where this comes from, because we need some resourcing at some point that's got to shift in terms of both individual projects and overall, and also that culture change is part of the conversation, I think, isn't it? So can you tell us more about what we're going to be doing? And I know we're going to be introducing Maggie as well.
Yeah, well, we'll be talking to Maggie soon about the detail of how the white paper came about. But really it is about, if you think about the chief information officer, they're the people that really are deep in the thick of this stuff, and they really get it. So the white paper is looking at their attitudes, but it's also exploring some of the internal conversations that they might be having. So just because they get it, it doesn't mean that the chief financial officer that they're asking for a bit of cash to put behind this gets it as well. So it's about how they go about that internal influencing and how they go about building a business case for accessibility and how they're driving that culture change through organisation. There's some really fascinating stuff in there, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Cool, great, let's get going. So we've published the white paper, it's on our exhibition booth. That's an exclusive only inside the conference, so we're not going to dwell on that. People can go and look at that, but you're going to be telling us more, and we're going to be meeting more people who've got something to say about the whole picture.
Absolutely, I can't wait.
Yeah, cool.
Great. So welcome, Maggie. If you'd like to just introduce yourself and IT Pro, we're delighted to have as our media sponsor for TechShare Pro this year.
Of course, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Thanks for having me. Fantastic session so far, so hopefully we will follow on from the conversations that have already been had so far. So I'm Maggie Holland. I'm Global Editorial Director and Head of Content Marketing for IT Pro, which is a global website aimed at IT decision makers across the board, and accessibility absolutely is and should be a key theme for us. So thank you for having me.
Really pleased to have you here. And Maggie, we started talking about this concept about in June, I think. Tell us a little bit about how we went out and how we surveyed people and how this has all come together from your perspective.
Absolutely, and it's been a really exciting project. I'm a bit sad it's over, to be honest with you, but the result of white paper, as Mark's mentioned, is great, and obviously it's available for people to access today and hopefully going forward. So on AbilityNet's behalf, Dennis Publishing's Insights team worked really closely with AbilityNet, first and foremost, to work out what we wanted to capture. And absolutely, as you've already mentioned, Sarah, we wanted to find out what IT decision makers really think about accessibility, their aptitude, their attitude, their general willingness to support and be part of the accessibility story, but also any challenges that they faced, whether that was budgetary support, measurement, etc., etc. So the Dennis Insights team created a survey, obviously in association with AbilityNet, and we reached out to C-suite, UK-based C-suite executives in July this year. We did it as an online survey, which on average took less than 10 minutes, sometimes much more quick to complete, and around 76% of respondents, so more than 3/4 of respondents, were actually DA, digital accessibility decision makers. The sectors that we surveyed ranged from retail, arts and cultures, media and sport, manufacturing, and the world of IT. And most of respondents, interestingly, who took part, but not all, came from smaller businesses. And as we've already mentioned, the resultant white paper is all around change agents and how the C-suite and IT leadership can really build and sustain a culture of digital accessibility.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. And you've mentioned the fact that a large proportion of these people are decision makers. So they really are in a position to drive that change, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
So shall we meet some of them? I know we've got 3 Chief Information Officers who are waiting in the wing. So if we invite them in now, and then we can find out what resonates with them about the white paper and find out a bit more about how they're driving that change. So if we could just start with some introductions. Ritam, if you'd like to just introduce yourself and tell us where you're from.
Absolutely. So I'm Ritam. I am the founder of Studio Graphene. We design and build blank canvas digital products, mostly for startups, but also for ambitious businesses.
Fantastic. And Manila, welcome. Please, would you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from?
I'm the organized and I would say
fantastic, thank you. And finally, Gerard, if you'd just like to say hello and introduce yourself.
Hello, pleasure to be here. I am the guide dog, where is very much behind everything we do. And from a personal level, I have macular degeneration, which means my eyes occasionally aren't as good as they should be. So much so, in about an hour's time after this session, I'm going to the hospital to have injections straight into my eyeball. That I promise is not painful, but I merely say that for the effect of people's faces. And I can see Maggie's has gone a little bit there. But I promise it's not painful, I promise you.
Well, I'm sure we wish you luck with that. Over to the results of the survey. One of the things that came through as a challenge that lots of people identified was this issue of measurement and how you measure the impact of accessibility. So I was wondering if we could start with what success looks like and what process have you guys got in place in terms of measuring accessibility and looking at that genuine return on investment and how you play that back into your organisation. So maybe, Ritam, if we could start with you.
Yeah, I think this is one of the most challenging things. How do you turn accessibility into a subjective debate and into an objective piece? And I think what we've found, and we've been learning about accessibility and how you measure it, and there are different things you can do, and they have different levels of impact. And what we've been trying to do is actually use simple tools to objectify it. And by that, I mean, for instance, contrast or color contrast is a big topic. But how do you objectively show and prove that it's important and the impact that it has? And I think what's helpful now is there are tools out there where you can actually measure whether what you've designed and built is appropriate from an accessibility perspective. So at least you can measure whether you've done the right thing. It's very hard, I think, still to actually measure the impact. I think it's especially hard when your demographic's quite wide and you don't know, you can't describe your exact demographic that you're building a digital product for, let's say. So it's hard to measure the impact, but it's easier to measure where you're at in terms of the scale and measures from an accessibility perspective now.
Yeah, great. It is difficult. And there's that kind of there's 2 different types of measurement, I think, isn't there? There's the kind of statistics that often those more senior people want to see. And then there's that kind of gut instinct. So I've asked you about measurement. I wonder what success feels like. Do you ever get those kind of yeah, that really worked moments?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that for me, the biggest learning that I've had is on this journey is that for a lot of people, it's an afterthought. So you've created a product, and then someone says that, is this accessible? And then it is a moment where you have that sudden realization. It really hits you, and you go, hang on, why did I not think about this? And I think for me, success in this space is accessibility by design. When you start, it is there, and it's something that you're thinking about, and you're aware of it throughout. And then whatever decisions you make, at least you're making that from a place of awareness. I think for me, the real failure is and it's sad when people realize it as an afterthought and they wish they'd designed it with accessibility in mind to start with. They just didn't know. So I think as long as you know what you're doing and that awareness is there from the beginning, that is the successful outcome.
Fantastic. And Manila, what about you? How do you go about measuring the impact of accessibility?
There's no almost trying to convince the other stakeholders that there's a need for this. It's a development standard, a design standard that's embedded in the framework of what we do within our digital and tech function. That's not always been the case. So that really did require buy-in from the digital and tech function, and there's definitely skill sets and roles that more naturally will align to that framework. But one of the most powerful examples that I've certainly found is by actually running live accessibility testing and taking colleagues to that exercise, so they can actually view customers and real live users of the products and services that we offer struggling with something that they've designed or they've built. I think that has a really powerful impact.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. And actually, there's a bit of a, I guess, a contradiction in some of the research that we've found. So the research shows that actually a lot of the drive behind this is still legislative. And I'm sure Maggie will agree that when we looked at the statistics, actual feedback from customers is still quite low down on the list of driving forces for people here. So I wonder what your take is on that, and how you're going about listening to customers, and whether you see that becoming more important as we move forward in terms of the field of accessibility.
Yeah, I definitely think it does. I mean, as an organisation, we're incredibly purpose-driven and focused. I mentioned earlier, we're a mutual organisation, so we really are. Our purpose is to deliver for the communities that we work within, and to help people to build a stronger financial future for themselves. So customer is absolutely at the heart of what we do, and the diversity around our customer base means that we will have customers who at times or permanently have accessibility needs. So for us it fits very well with our purpose and our core set of principles and how we operate. I do think it will become even more standard though in other organisations, even some real commercial focused organisations who perhaps struggle to get it as high on the agenda as they need to do, because if you just look at some of the other big topics like diversity, inclusion, and equity and sustainability, it's on par with those types of topics, and everybody really needs to show that we're working with taking positive to be as inclusive as possible.
Absolutely, and that measurement is part of proving it, isn't it? It's a really important part of that. So if we come to you now, Gerard, how are you going about measuring the impact of accessibility and playing back those successes, both internally and outside your organisation?
So very, very similar to Ritam and Manila. I think one metric, it's very easy to find out when you have done it wrong, because people will let you know. So if you're not hearing that, that's sometimes no news is indeed good news. It's about involving people who are most impacted, because they can offer the insights that will really show you exactly what needs to be done. And I think we're all on this journey. And I think back to, I'm unfortunately old enough to be classed as a Zennial, which means I was sort of round about my teenage years is when the internet started to really take off. And I think back to the early days of the internet, where it wasn't accessible for anyone really. It was all about, who remembers the welcome pages you'd have to click through to actually get to the main page, and lots of flashing text everywhere because someone discovered you could easily do that in HTML. And we've been on a journey where accessibility for everyone has always become more and more important, that it's about the content, not exactly how the content looks. Content is king. And I think, as Miller said, this will become more and more important, because you need to be able to provide your services and your products to absolutely everyone, because there's absolutely no reason not to. So it's going to become more and more important. The metrics are hard because there are certain standards out there, particularly for digital products, that you need to adhere to, but a lot of it is very subjective. I think one crucial point is there's a real difference. Accessibility is important, but so is usability. And a number of times you can have an accessible product, but that doesn't mean it's usable or as usable for someone who is either hearing impaired, visually impaired. I can think of one example where we were looking to get a system that required someone to fill out a form, and the pop-up, so first of all it had a pop-up, which is annoying, but the pop-up, if you entered the data incorrectly, was completely invisible to screen readers. And the argument of the people who were selling the product was, well, if they enter all the data correctly, then it's accessible. And that's not an argument, because whilst it may be accessible, it's definitely not usable. And we have to make sure that we deliver both of those. Otherwise, there's just no point, really.
And it's really interesting hearing you talking about the journey that you've been on and the successes along the way, and I'm really hearing your passion and how rewarding that is. But there's a kind of a strange relationship, I think, between the ability to measure this and one of the other key findings that we found, which was that people seem to think that the job of accessibility is never done, and there's a slight sort of negative edge to that. But, you know, as evangelists, we would say, actually, how amazing to be on this continuous learning journey, to bring people with us, to embed a culture of accessibility within our organisation. So I wonder what your take is on that perspective, and how you would counter that this is a job that's never done, because it's about, you know, celebrating those successes along the way. So I don't know who'd like to start there. Manila, maybe we start with you.
Yeah, happy to. I completely agree. It's a continuous improvement, continuous development topic. Similarly with usability, and I think so. One of the areas that I talk to the team about is the pivot from project to product. So when we build our digital products, these are not projects that you build and then they're done. There is a need for continual evolution, because the end user, the end customer, their device changes, the experience around how they shop, how they consume media and so on, that changes, and that influences how, in my example, how they consume financial services. So if we're standing up digital products, digital capabilities, those will never be done. There'll always be opportunities for improvement and continual evolution, and you know, that in itself is probably a bigger challenge and a change in mindset in traditional business than the need for accessibility, actually, because it changes how you monetize, how you financially support an ongoing product that doesn't have an end as such. But yeah, couldn't agree more. It's there's no end.
Yeah, and it's that link between innovation, isn't it? Actually, you know, would you want there to be an end? It's that continuous drive to innovate in digital, but digital accessibility, which runs absolutely in parallel to that, doesn't it? So, Gerard, what's your take on that? Where are you on your journey, and what inspires you to keep going? You know, what do you see ahead?
Well, I think, so to echo what Nilla said, that we don't exist in a bubble. We exist with various different products, devices, that we can make something as accessible as usable as possible. But there will be an update that causes something to change. But it's no different to, I think, of iOS updates that have caused web browsers to display things incorrectly, and you adapt your product accordingly. So it never ends. A saying I like to use is that if you're not embarrassed by the first version of a product you stick out, then you've probably spent too long making it. And that is key, that you get it out the door, you get feedback, you learn from that, you improve the product. And I think that's what is exciting. I don't think we have days anymore where you spend 5 years building something and release it, because God, in that 5 years there's probably been 5 different versions of iPhones. There's been a new development come along. You can't do that anymore. You have to do rapid development. But it gives you, and this is the important part, it gives you an opportunity to learn what worked well, what didn't, and then adapt accordingly.
Great. And Ritam, how are you keeping up? How are you keeping pace with these constant changes in digital, and how are you making sure that what you do, looks good and works well, but also is accessible for people?
Yeah, I think it comes down to firstly setting up that accessibility foundation in everything you do. So there are things where I can understand, we work with a lot of startups where they say they don't have necessarily the budget to adhere to every single accessibility standard that we might propose to them that they should adhere to. But I always tell them, I'm like, there are things that you can do where it's accessibility by design. So I always like using the color contrast checker as an example. So, it's not like it's more effort to get the color contrast right. You can just think about it from the start and not build one where the color contrasts don't work. But I think the biggest challenge we have is that this is a constantly evolving landscape. It's the same thing that's been pointed out earlier. You have new devices, new screen sizes. You have new ways of interacting with those screens. People are talking about the metaverse in the future, etc. So I think we're constantly looking at an evolving landscape. And I think when you look at the technology ecosystem, it moves much faster than the physical ecosystem. So you are constantly playing catch up, and you can only try your best to play catch up. Startups will have to do things super quickly, evolve super fast, and sometimes they will not be thinking about accessibility front and center. But I actually think if you keep thinking about it from a design perspective and get it right then, and just be aware if you're choosing not to take certain steps from an accessibility perspective, it's fine, but do it from a place of awareness. Just know what you're doing is, I think, the best way we can stay.
Right. And I guess some of this conversation dovetails into the skills and the training and experience that you have inside your organisation. And Maggie, there were some really interesting insights, weren't there, in the report about securing budget for training and the different types of training that are available. I wonder if you've got any thoughts around the training piece that you can get our experts of feedback on.
Yeah, I think everything that's been said so far really resonates, and as you already mentioned, in terms of the never-ending task, I think it was 22% of respondents to our research felt it was really a burden, accessibility being a burden rather than an opportunity. But I'm hearing from our panellists, it's absolutely an opportunity to really provide an excellent experience to everybody, not just some people. And then with regards to training and budget, I think 15% of respondents said it was difficult to secure DA dedicated budget. And then the other challenge we had around skills and awareness was who's responsible. So 44% of our respondents said that digital accessibility is everyone's responsibility, which I absolutely agree with. It should be everyone's responsibility. But if in making it everyone's, it's hard for someone to then take ownership and leadership, particularly around budget for training and support. So really keen to hear from our panellists how they kind of really break down those barriers from what they know they need to do and want to achieve, and how they get other stakeholders in the organisation involved and importantly get the budget and training.
Yeah, absolutely. So who wants to start there? How do you go about getting the money that you need and the training that you need to roll things out? Ritam, over to you.
We've got...
Oh no, sorry, Minna, you carry on.
We have access to an online training portal which covers pretty much all the topics that you would expect in digital and tech. And accessibility is a big feature within that. So that is available for all of our colleagues. But in addition to that, there's a number of apprentices and graduate trainees who've come through recently within the organisation we've sponsored to conduct their dissertations specifically on the topic, which has been invaluable for the function for them, but also then sharing that with the wider team. But in terms of accountability, so the way we have it within our framework, it's the design team, so that we're getting it right up front in the design, but we're also very testing led. So similarly with it's part of the software development lifecycle. So before any piece of software goes out the door, it's tested, it's user acceptance tested, it's pen tested, it's also accessibility tested. So there's a certain criteria before we'll even release a product. Now, I'm not saying that everything on our digital portfolio adheres to that yet. That's a framework that we've introduced probably in the last 18 months. And most of what we're addressing is through some of redesign and redevelopment work that we have underway. Some of it is also we're picking up through the continued development. But to be honest, there are some applications that are not achieving the standards that we set ourselves today. But we have them on our roadmap, because obviously we can't do everything all at once. So we have to tackle it in a sensible roadmap.
Fantastic. And Ritam, what does training look like for you internally? How are you kind of like rolling out? Is there enough money there for that training? How are you upskilling your own people to make sure that accessibility is front and centre when they're building products?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, the challenge has been that a lot of people sometimes associate training with something that's a bit boring. And it's a task. So, when I try and force people on the team to go through some training, it's an interesting reaction. But I think it's how do you make it interesting, and how do you make people learn from folks that they respect and they understand where they're coming from. So, for example, I sent part of the product management team at Studio Graphene to Web Summit this year. They find it very inspirational. They really enjoyed the speakers that were talking, and and they came back and they said actually one of the hot topics was accessibility, and they heard a Google product manager talk about accessibility, so everyone listened. And one of the things that their initial reactions they were describing was that they said, oh well, of course Google has an unlimited budget to spend on accessibility, but actually what the product manager did really well was talk about, if you're not Google and you don't have that kind of money, what are the low-hanging fruit? What are the 4 or 5 easy things you can do? And actually, I found that was quite effective. So I'm trying to find ways to. I think there's a lot of training available, but how do you find training material that people find engaging and interesting, and don't see it as a tick box exercise? Because I think you really have to understand it at a grassroots level and understand the easy things you can do from a design and product thinking perspective. So that's been kind of the focus area. I don't think it's been as much about budget for us. It's been more about getting people to realize this is important and realize that it can have a true impact if they just do a few simple things.
And it's about mixing it up, isn't it? I mean, that's something that we saw in the survey, is that people are using a mixture of going to conferences, events, hearing from inspirational speakers, like you say, taking up activities like free online webinars. Manili, you're talking about an online learning portal. We say learning about accessibility. There's loads of different ways of learning, and if you can get your staff engaged and on that pathway, then they can begin to learn from each other, which we'll be talking more about champions later, and that's all part of that rich learning process. So, Gerard, how are you embracing all that, and how are you bringing that into really make accessibility part of that ongoing learning program?
So it won't surprise you to know that being at Guide Dogs, we obviously have a number of subject matter experts who are, I will pick them up quite well. They are world leaders in assistive technology. So having that resource there that's available to share that knowledge and that experience is invaluable. I think as well, talking about how do you secure funding. So Ritam said something that was vital, that it's accessibility by design. If we skip back 5 years ago, security by design wasn't really that popular, but I can guarantee now no one is designing any products without security there, because we all know if you don't do it to start with, when you do discover, and you will, that there are problems, it costs you significantly more time, resource to fix them, and your reputation invariably, if it's a security issue, is damaged. The same is true with accessibility. If you have it there from the start, if you make something that is accessible to everyone, then you already have a product. You don't need to sit there and go, well, this is only accessible for a certain demographic. If you design from the start, it may take you a little bit longer to start with, but as we all know, that investment in time early on in the product design pays dividends later.
Absolutely, and one of the other talks I was in, somebody was saying about how wouldn't it be great when we drop the inclusive from inclusive design and we're just talking about design and all design is inclusive, and you know that's what this is about, and that continuous learning and pushing us forward there. You know, and I think Mark, the white paper is part of this learning. You know, it's been fantastic working on it with Maggie. It's great to hear from people who've got that kind of first-hand insight. So thank you ever so much, everybody. And it's available in the, just one more plug for the booth. Please do go and download it. It looks fantastic. There's loads of rich data in there, and there's also levers for change. So how to accelerate this to continue us all on this fantastic journey that we're on together. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time today. That's been great.
Thank you, everyone. Actually, I've actually got a question. I just because this rounds off to link into the next bits for me. So first of all, Maggie, the work we've done with you is brilliant. I love that report. It's brilliant. This is the first time we've managed to pull this sort of opinion piece together from outside our community, really, you know, the accessibility bunch. We often describe ourselves as lone evangelists. You know, that this going back a couple of years, this same session was filled with a session called Beyond the Lone Evangelist. How do we go out and convert and connect? I'm just very interested. Do you feel like you're the only person in the organisation who's really thinking about this? Is there other people around you that you're connecting into, just inside your organisation? Do you stand out as someone who's remarkable as being the only one who's ever thought about this, or actually are we seeing a sort of a growing connection across your profession? I mean, Ritam and your team, very tech-led. I mean, are they arriving with questions about accessibility now, or you still feel like you're having to push rather than pull?
I'd actually say, you know, oddly enough, I was a bit late to the party myself. So I had product managers in my team flag it many years ago, and more, you know, I started realizing a few years ago how important it was. It's you know, accessibility creates a better product all round for everyone. And so actually I've noticed that it's so logical that it was just an awareness issue. Yeah. It wasn't that once you become aware, you really need to push people, they get it immediately. And then it is a logical conversation of you know, which specific components you go after. If you're building a product where you will have only 1,000 users, you know, and you can't afford to go after every single accessibility component, do you shortchange that in some way? But it's I think I've not actually really had to push everyone. I've been surprised at how aligned everyone is on this point once they understand the logic, the underpinning logic.
And Manila, were you the initial evangelist, or were you converted by somebody else?
I may have been the first one to raise it, but then I discovered there were evangelists across the whole function, yeah, which was great. And actually, that's what's helped to embed it. You know, it wasn't just something that I was talking about. I think how we've managed to embed it is, as I mentioned earlier, by making it part of the framework of the software development lifecycle, but also by taking the team that actually design and build the products, taking them to accessibility testing exercises where they can actually witness customers with accessibility challenges trying to use the products and services that we've built. There's nothing more powerful, and the empathy that it creates, I think, is really strong.
Cool. And Gerard, is it a sensible assumption to think that you may have had that empathy built into the DNA of the organisation before we go anywhere? That somehow within an organisation like yours, there's such a level of awareness of the challenges that could be created if you don't get it right, or actually was it still the piece that you still needed to get people on board and get them to consider this stuff, in detail? Obviously, there's some technology changes there as well.
You didn't need to get them on board, and I certainly at Guide Dogs can't claim to be the lone evangelist, not at all. I can feel the eyes in the back of my head looking at me if I were to dare to say that. But it's also fair to say that we haven't always got it right. Technology has moved on massively, and if we think back over the years, there's been times where because we deal with external companies and we have to sometimes take the product that they offer, sometimes we've had to pick the least worst accessible option. But thankfully, because we are guide dogs and we have that knowledge, so for instance, we work with Salesforce and Microsoft to feedback on their products and go, well, it's accessible to a point, but this would be great to take it to that next level. But in the past, we haven't had that flexibility, particularly with smaller software companies who we can try and explain as much as possible, but sometimes the bottom line speaks loudest, and our request for a feature doesn't get introduced. But it's getting a lot better because people are seeing it that it's, just to be frank, it's the right thing to do. There's no reason not to do it. And if you start your product with that in mind, then it makes everything so much easier and better.
So, and just rounding off with you, Maggie, that sounds really positive. I mean, in terms of your readership and your understanding of your demographic of all the stuff you do across IT Pro, have we got an unusual sample here? Is this sort of, we've had that, the reason they turned up is because they think the same as us? How big is this? I'm thinking of the security thing. Are we going to see in a few years' time accessibility being treated like security? And because you've obviously seen those changes come across a very broad range of people that you're connected in through the titles you're running.
Absolutely, and it's been amazing to be part of this session and hear from all of our panellists in terms of what they're doing. And to your point, Mark, about kind of lone agents of change, I think one of the things that we really identified in the white paper and research was about building a network and being champions. And I think we've definitely got 3 champions here within the organisation who are working with other champions. So I think that network effect will definitely help accelerate. And I do think we're not very far away, but I'm definitely not going to put a number of years or months on it from that realisation of just having design being inclusive by default. So we won't be talking about inclusive design, it will just be design. I think that was Gerard who coined that, so I won't steal that phrase there. But I think we are absolutely, that will happen, and it will be thanks to people, that we've got on the panels here, as well as other people who've been involved in TechShare Pro over the last few days. So yeah, I'm just inspired by what I've heard so far today in this panel and the other sessions as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. The work we've done, the white paper, as we've mentioned, is available online, and the work that you've done, and Sarah, you and Maggie have done an amazing job. That report is fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us, Ritam, Manila, and Gerard. It's fantastic to hear about that change happening in organisations. It makes you feel like there's a direction. You keep going, because that is that. We all feel that endless journey bit, don't we? So it's just wonderful to get that sort of collective sense of we're all going in the right direction. So thank you very much for joining us. And if you've been listening in, you'll have heard the word champion several times, not by coincidence. There are sessions this afternoon all looking at accessibility champions. And the other thing that we haven't discussed is, Maggie, you can sit down, it's fine. Sorry about that. Continuity error. The other thing we haven't discussed is maturity models. And I was just briefly going to mention the work we're doing around maturity models, because a lot of those organisations are trying to plot themselves on this scale, Sarah. And we have a session this afternoon about maturity models as well. And it very much fits in with that theme, I think, doesn't it?
It does, and I know you're going to be talking in that session, and that maturity model is very much about building a roadmap, and it's not about oh my goodness, you're only here. It's about being able to see where you are, and as our amazing panelists said, about being able to see where you're going and be able to measure yourself along the way, so that you can keep giving yourself a little pat on the back as you slowly move through those levels. And see how you can accelerate through those levels as well. What are the levers that you can pull, and how can you get from A to B more quickly? Cool.
And I think this is all about the strategic leadership that people who are in the TechShare Pro family, if you like, and have been a part of the journey with us. These are the things that we're starting to see more of around us. The sessions this afternoon, you'll be able to join in, connect in, and share stories of your own, and really start to build that sort of set of tools within your organisation. So finally, before I round off, I've got a few announcements. Very briefly, don't forget to go to the expo halls. That's where our download is. Loads of other great stuff on all the other stands as well. There's a leaderboard. There's a prize for the leaderboard. The leaderboard you win by going to lots of sessions. As far as I know, there's other things you can do as well. Have a look at that. There's a swag bag around. There's a prize in there from Microsoft of a Surface laptop. Have a look in there if you haven't come across that yet. And then finally, just a general point. I don't think we need to say this in any. I'm hoping we don't need to say this particularly in any depth. But this is a great space for people to connect up and share. Please be respectful of other people around you. Listen to what's going on. A lot of the sessions are Teams meetings for you to just collaborate and connect up. Please use that opportunity to connect up in a respectful and kind way. So thanks so much, Sarah. That last session finished it off so wonderfully. Thank you to Ted and to Heather and to Jen and to Ellie. We're very briefly just going to show you a few of the tweets that are coming in. If you haven't been following us on Twitter, please do, or any of the other social platforms. There's other stuff on LinkedIn is going really great. There's a picture of us on the internet. That's
Oh.
always pleasing. There's Ted and Heather. A fabulous conversation with Ted Drake and Heather Hepburn. Learned so much in every one of these TechShare Pro sessions. And that was great. We've been concentrating this year on setting up conversations between people just so that we can all listen in on what they're learning. I think that was a brilliant example. I'm shifting from repair mode to an accessibility first mode should be everyone's long-term goal. Building a future around accessible technology immediately shifts the focus of the design and ensures your system is accessible from scratch. Take a look at Twitter if you haven't yet. Take a look at LinkedIn and the stuff that's being shared. And join us at lunchtime for the Lunch and Learns, and we'll see you in the afternoon for the workshops, and then the keynote at the end of the day. We're going to wrap up looking ahead to Accessibility 2030. What are we going to be talking about in 10 years' time? So I'll see you all then. Thanks for joining us.